Watercolor posters! Our next project is watercolor posters. This is part one. We're going to talk about planning. We're going to plan the composition, which is sort of the layout on the page. We're going to plan your colors, and we're going to plan your text, because you can see in the example on the right, we're going to combine all of those things together into a final work of art. And watercolor posters are a type of graphic design that combines color, watercolor techniques, and text to convey a message. Now remember, we learned about graphic design when we did the mundane merit badges. So you already know that graphic design is the combination of images and words to make the message more impactful. And this whole project will include 3 different parts, which will take 3 weeks. So the first week, this week, we're going to work on the planning. We're going to plan the composition, we're going to plan the colors, and we're going to plan your text. Next week, we will learn watercolor painting techniques. So next week, we will be painting. This week, no painting. Next week, painting. And the third week, we will add our text, and we'll add it in an artistic and visually appealing way. So here's an example of a finished watercolor poster. And here's another one. Now let's take a look at these side by side. Both of these will meet the expectations for this project, but what differences do you see between these 2 examples? Hit pause for a minute and just really observe closely. What differences do you see between these 2 examples? If you said example A has cool colors and B has warm colors, if you said example A has curvy shapes and example B has shapes with straight lines and sharp corners, if you said example A, the lettering is done by hand, and example B, it's printed out and collaged on, all of those are correct. There's also a lot of differences too. Like in A, they painted in the background. In B, they did not. And there's a lot of other choices too. But those are the big ones. The colors are different. The types of shape are different, and the way they added lettering is different. So for this week's assignment, you will need to do the watercolor poster planning sheet. This is in Google Classroom in this week's assignment. Here is an overview of what you need to do on this planning worksheet. I'm just going to give you an overview now, then I'm going to go into more detail. Step 1, you will need to make the composition on your watercolor paper, and you'll need to insert a photo of that watercolor paper onto this planning sheet. Step 2, you'll need to plan your color scheme and choose your colors. And step 3, you will choose text to add later on. These might be song lyrics, it might be a poem, a famous speech, an inspirational quote. You choose. But those are the 3 things that we're doing for our planning this week. So let's talk about these in more detail. Step 1, the composition. For this step, for this project, you must use the watercolor paper that came in your kit. It came looking like this, rolled up in a tube with a rubber band around it. You have to use this exact paper. All right, watercolor paint will not behave the way you want it to if you don't use this paper. So look in your art kit. If you cannot find this paper, you must email me immediately so I can get you what you need. Okay, you must use this paper. Then you need to decide. Choose between either an organic or a geometric composition. And remember, organic, the example on the left, shapes with curves. Geometric, the example on the right, straight lines, sharp corners. Your choice. And however you do it, your composition must have both positive space and negative space. So the positive space must be areas that can be filled in with paint. They must be shapes that can be filled in with paint. And the negative space will be where your lettering will go. in between your painted shapes. Okay, so make sure that you have both positive space and negative space. And aim for at least 8 sections of positive space. Don't make these too small, okay? 8 is about the right amount. You don't want too few, you don't want so many that they get tiny. Okay, this is about right. And to make the composition, you can either draw it with a Sharpie. Remember, you're doing this on your watercolor paper, or you can use masking tape to lay out your design. And this works great for a geometric style. All right, but you're doing one of those two things. You're either drawing it on your watercolor paper with Sharpie, or you're using tape on your watercolor paper to tape off different sections. Then you are going to insert a photograph of that composition, of your actual watercolor paper with your design drawn on it. Take a photograph of that and insert it into this section on your planning sheet. And if you're not sure how to do that, I will include a video on how to do that. But you must photograph your actual composition that's on your watercolor paper and insert a photograph of that here. Step 2, plan your color scheme and choose your colors. Remember, we've already learned about color schemes. We learned about this when we did our merit badges. We learned these 3. Complementary, which is a pair of colors directly opposite each other on the color wheel. Analogous, these are colors that are directly next to each other on the color wheel. And monochromatic is one single color, light and dark versions. All right, so you're going to choose one of these 3 color schemes, and then within that color scheme, choose your colors. For example, in this analogous color scheme example, it's an analogous color scheme, and the colors they used were yellow, yellow-green, and green. So color scheme, actual colors used. And there are some online color scheme generators that can give you inspiration if you want to go look at them. We looked at one, the one on the left was called Color Hunt, and there's another one that I found on the right. Both of these websites, I have links in Google Classroom to these websites. You can go there and look for inspiration, but remember, you must choose a color scheme: complementary, analogous, or monochromatic. And whatever colors you choose must fit within that color scheme. And keep in mind that even though your watercolor paint set has just 8 colors, watercolors mix really, really well together to create endless possibilities. So don't worry about having limited colors. This week, I just want a color plan. Next week, we'll paint. So on the planning sheet for color planning, here's what you need to do. You need to highlight your choice of color scheme. Highlight your choice: complementary, analogous, or monochromatic. And then below that, type in what specific colors you plan to use. Step 3, this is the last thing you need to do this week. You need to choose your text. And before you start, I really want you to think about words that have meaning to you. It might be one longer quote, it might be a few shorter messages, but I really want you to choose something that is meaningful to you. So your quote could be a famous speech, like this example of a quote from Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech. You could choose song lyrics. You could choose a poem. You could choose an inspirational saying. Any of those is fine. Just make sure it is appropriate for school. And here's what you need to do on the planning sheet. You need to copy and paste or type in the text that you plan to use into this area on the planning sheet. And include as much information about the source of the text as you can. Not everything will have this information, but if you can find who the author is, add that. If you can find the title of it, like if it's a song, give me the title of the song. And if you can find the date of its publication, add that too. But like I said, you won't find that for everything. But if you can, please add it. And then that's all you need to do this week. Be sure to turn in the watercolor planning assignment in Google Classroom. Make sure you turn in. And make sure you put your watercolor paper in a safe place because you need it next week. Because next week we are painting. So you will need to have your watercolor paper, you'll need to have your paint set, your brush, and a cup of water, and maybe some paper towels ready before class begins next week. Next week is painting, this week is planning. All right, that's it. Let me know if you have any questions.